Which is more important, gaining higher consciousness or accumulating material possessions? The answer seems obvious, at least intellectually. Most of us would say higher consciousness, self awareness, or inner freedom. And yet, despite knowing better, we repeatedly choose the opposite. We get pulled into status games, our ego inflates, we chase validation, not because we're stupid, but because these things work, at least temporarily. Both paths are endless, but they move in very different directions. Seeking higher consciousness feels like climbing a spiral staircase that never quite ends, while consuming possessions and achievements feels like digging a hole that keeps getting deeper and darker. Our one expands perspective, the other narrows it. If we know that objects, experiences, and achievements won't ultimately satisfy us, why do we keep chasing them? Because of what we're really after isn't the object itself. We're after certainty, control, and a sense of completion. We believe that if we obtain the thing we want, we'll finally arrive somewhere stable. You see this play out constantly. There's always that one friend who works relentlessly for promotion. They show up early, stay late, and take on the most difficult projects. Eventually, it pays off. They get the title, the raise, the recognition. They return to baseline. Soon, the next goal appears. Senior management, partner, a bigger role. The treadmill speeds up, but it never stops. The uncomfortable truth is that this isn't just capitalism or culture at work. It's dopamine. Progress feels good. Winning feels meaningful. Becoming more powerful feels like becoming more alive. For people who are highly driven, ambition doesn't feel like a flaw. It feels like virtue. It feels like growth. That's where the conflict begins. Because higher consciousness asks for something that feels almost offensive to that drive. It asks you to loosen your grip. It asks you to stop chasing the next upgrade of the self. It asks you to notice that the hunger itself never ends, no matter how much you feed it. But here's the part people don't like to admit. Letting go doesn't feel noble at first. It feels like loss. It feels like wasted potential. It feels like betraying something powerful inside you. For someone who has built their life by striving, letting go can feel indistinguishable from giving up. So the question isn't whether gaining or letting go is better. The real question is what kind of wanting actually leads somewhere and what kind of wanting just refines the cage. What feels dangerous to me right now isn't chasing more, it's slowing down. I can see that striving never ends, and I understand that intellectually, but the idea of stopping still feels certain. When I look at my dating life, that becomes obvious. Last year, I went on a lot of dates, speed dating events, multiple times a month, even while I was already talking to someone I liked. Sometimes the date would go well, and instead of letting that settle, I felt an urge to do it again. Not because I needed someone new, but because I needed to know I still had it. There's a part of me that feels like I missed out socially when I was younger. I wasn't very social in high school or college, and I carried this sense that I need to catch up. I hadn't had sex in years, and breaking that cycle felt urgent, almost symbolic. I would think, is this person going to be the one who breaks it? Or is it going to be someone else? When a date went well, it didn't bring peace, it triggered momentum. I became bolder, and that part was real growth. My approach anxiety dropped. Talking to women became easier. I won't pretend that didn't matter, but alongside that growth, something else crept in. The drive didn't relax, it sharpened. I started chasing repetition instead of connection. I wasn't asking, do I really actually want to be here with this person? I was asking, can I do it again? Can I recreate the spark? can I prove that this wasn't a fluke? That's when I noticed something unsettling. Even while I was with a woman, there was a restless feeling underneath it. This quiet urge saying, I need something else. She's boring. This isn't it. Maybe the next one will be different. Maybe the right one is still out there. At some point, striving stopped feeling like growth and started feeling like compulsion. I tell myself the goal is confidence or freedom or become the kind of man who can walk up to any woman without hesitation. There's an image there, almost cinematic, and I'm drawn to it. But the closer I look, the more I wonder whether I'm chasing connection or just upgrading an identity. Because the moment slows down, the moment there isn't a next date or a next pursuit, something uncomfortable appears. Not desire, but emptiness. And instead of sitting with it, I want to move again. That's the real tension for me. Not whether striving is bad, but whether I know how to stop without feeling like I'm disappearing. What I'm actually afraid of isn't that I'll stop growing, it's that I'll lose the progress I already made. I spent years digging myself out of a hole, physically and mentally. Striving wasn't optional for me, it was for survival. So when I think about slowing down, even intentionally, it doesn't register as balance. It registers as regression. I feel this most clearly outside of dating. When I first started doing stand-up, I went to open mics almost every night. When I started boxing, I trained 5 days a week. That intensity mattered. It built something real. It changed who I was. Now my schedule looks different. I box a couple times a week. I don't hit mics the way I used to. Part of this that is reality, but part of it triggers something deeper. A voice that says if I'm not doing as much as I once did, I must be slipping. That I'm falling behind, that whatever I built is fragile and could disappear if I stop pushing. That's why slowing down feels dangerous. It feels like settling. It feels like complacency. And complacency, in my mind, is how you end up back where you started. So the drive stays on. Not because I don't understand the limits of striving, but because striving feels like the only thing standing between who I am now and who I used to be. This is where the conflict sharpens. The same drive that pulled me out of a hole also refuses to ever let me stop climbing. Progress becomes something I have to constantly defend. Rest feels suspicious. Stillness feels irresponsible. And yet, if I'm honest, this way of living never actually arrives anywhere. There's always a sense that I should be doing more, going harder, proving something again. At some point, the question stops being whether striving works. It becomes whether I trust myself enough to slow down without disappearing. If I stop pushing, what I'm really afraid of losing isn't momentum, it's confidence. Not surface level confidence, but the kind that's built slowly through effort and consistency. The mental infrastructure I have now is completely different from what it was years ago. And it took an enormous amount of work to build. That didn't come from affirmations or insight. It came from showing up even when it was hard, from not letting myself slide back into the person I used to be. So when I think about slowing down, I don't picture rest. I picture erosion. I picture that structure weakening. I picture becoming soft, less sharp, and less capable. I picture becoming ordinary again. And that terrifies me more than exhaustion ever could. Striving gave me something concrete to stand on. It gave me a sense of direction, competence, and self-respect. Without it, I'm not sure what anchors me. That's why the idea of letting go feels irresponsible. It feels like gambling with something I fought too hard to earn. This is where the conflict becomes real. Higher consciousness asks for surrender, but surrender feels like it's aimed directly at the thing that saved me. The same discipline that built my confidence is the thing that spiritually seems to question. And I don't trust that I'll keep what I've built if I start reinforcing it. So the drive stays active, not because I don't understand its limits, but because it feels like the only barrier between who I am now and who I never want to become again. The problem is that this logic never actually ends. If confidence is something that can only be maintained through constant pressure, then rest becomes dangerous by definition. Stillness feels like decay. And any moment without forward motion starts to feel like a step backward. That's the bind I'm in, not between growth and comfort, but between being protecting the self I built and questioning whether I'm allowed to stop building at all. When I really sit with it, what I'm afraid of losing isn't just progress or identity, it's meaning, and more than that, it's self respect. A lot of the discipline in my life didn't start because I wanted to be impressive. It started because I didn't want to be someone I couldn't stand to be. There was a version of me that felt passive, numb, and directionless, and I worked very hard to move away from him. Over time, that effort built a kind of internal standard, a sense that my life was pointed at something, that I was living in a way I could justify to myself. That's what feels fragile. If I imagine stopping, what I picture isn't a healthy, grounded man enjoying stillness. If I imagine stopping, what I picture isn't a healthy, grounded man enjoying stillness. I picture myself slowly compromising, letting things slide, losing the structure that keeps me oriented. And once that starts, I don't trust where it ends. So when people talk about letting go, slowing down, or surrendering the drive, what I hear underneath is a question I don't know how to answer yet. If I'm not actively striving, what gives my life weight? Striving has been my way of protecting my meaning. It's been how I've protected self-respect. It's how I've been able to say that my days are not interchangeable, that what I do in my time actually matters. That's why the idea of letting go feels so threatening. It doesn't feel like peace. It feels like erasing the very thing that made my life feel worthy, taken seriously. And yet, if I'm honest, I also see the cost of living this way. The constant forward pull, the inability to rest without guilt, the sense that whatever I've done is never quite enough. Meaning becomes something that I have to constantly manufacture instead of something I'm allowed to inhabit. That's the edge I'm standing on, between a way of living that gives me self-respect and a suspicion that the same machinery might also be what's keeping me from ever feeling at home in my own life. When I look closely, there are moments in my life where meaning and self-respect didn't come from effort at all. They came from something much simpler and much harder to trust. I noticed it when I started dating, and I noticed it again when I started my job as a college advisor. In both places, I initially tried to be impressive. I tried to be insightful. I tried to say the right thing. With students especially, I felt the pressure to help, to guide, to offer something valuable. I thought that was what made me useful. But the moments that actually mattered to me didn't come from that. They came when I stopped trying to perform and just spoke honestly, not in a strategic way and not in a confessional way, just accurately. When I disclosed something about myself without thinking of how it sounded or whether it was impressive, something shifted. There was a sense of weightlessness when I spoke, a feeling that I wasn't pushing or selling or proving anything. I didn't feel bigger in those moments. I felt clearer. And what surprised me was that those moments created real connection with students, on dates, in conversations where I wasn't trying to be anything more than what I actually was. I didn't have to persuade anyone. I didn't have to optimize myself. Being honest was enough. That's hard for me to accept because it challenges the story I've lived by for years. The story that says meaning has to be earned through effort, that self-respect is something you manufacture by pushing yourself forward. That if you stop striving, everything collapses. But those moments of honesty suggest something else. They suggest that meaning doesn't only come from building. Sometimes it comes from stopping the internal distortion long enough to tell the truth. This doesn't mean striving is wrong. Striving saved me. Discipline gave me a spine. Effort pulled me out of places I don't want to return to. I'm not interested in pretending that way. But I am starting to question whether striving is meant to be permanent. Whether it's a foundation, not a destination. Whether the drive that built my confidence is the same thing that now keeps me from trusting myself without it. So the question I'm left with isn't whether to gain or to let go in some absolute sense. It's where each one belongs. What still needs discipline and what needs honesty instead. What actually builds meaning and what only maintains motion. I don't have that final answer yet. What I know is that when I stop trying to be impressive and speak truthfully, something settles, and the experience matters enough that I can't ignore it anymore. Maybe the work isn't to kill the drive or to surrender ambition, but to learn where effort ends and truth begins, and to trust that self-respect might survive that transition.